family dynamic can be really, really challenging for boundaries because you have these long-standing, well-established childhood relationships that show up now at the dinner table, even though you're all grown-ups, right? If you were the middle child and used to being ignored, if your parents were always bickering and you were the peacekeeper, if your parents divorced and always try to get you to pick sides, like those dynamics show up now in your family relationships. And it's almost hard because everyone in your life is probably, well, that's just how she is. That's just how mom is. And I'm like, no, that's how mom has trained you so that you don't challenge her on some of these really rude or insensitive or overbearing behaviors. But in a family, if you want to break this generational pattern and start establishing healthy boundaries for the good of the entire family dynamic, somebody's got to go first. So hopefully people listening or who read the book are willing to go first.
Oh my God, yes. And so the thing that four that you just said actually, which are really powerful, I want to repeat them because they're so strong, is it's usually about food and weight, relationships and kids, your career or your lifestyle.
Yeah. Those are all areas that they seem just up for discussion and up for opinion just by you walking in the room. You don't have to ask for an opinion. They're just foisted upon you anytime you visit.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. You know, I don't want to be pressured about my baby making status. Maybe I just had a miscarriage and I haven't told anybody yet. And that can be really traumatizing. Let's not even talk about like food, alcohol, diet culture, body weight. Like people, I think, especially older generations who have grown up with this idea that like, oh, have you lost weight or you look skinny is the ultimate compliment. That can be so incredibly triggering for somebody who's going through health issues, who's struggling with diet culture, who has a history of eating disorders or struggling with their relationship with food. So again, setting expectations well ahead of time and like not in the moment can be so helpful. I have a rule that you don't talk about food over food. And sometimes that's all you need to say in the moment. Like, oh, are you going to eat all of that? Oh, I don't talk about food over food. Or please don't comment on my plate and then change the subject can be really helpful. If you know you have a visit coming up, setting the expectation ahead of time, which is, hey, we're going to be visiting this weekend. Really looking forward to seeing you. Just so you know, I will not be receiving any conversation about when John and I are going to be married. That's not something we're like going to discuss, and it'd be great if you didn't bring it up. Are you willing to do that? And then you set that expectation. Imagine how much more free you would feel if you knew you could show up to your family dinner and know that whatever that one subject was that you were dreading so much just wouldn't be brought up.
That was so much that I didn't want to interrupt you, but I want to take one thing at a time. So like with the food, the fat, especially, oh my God, if you've already got food issues, if you've already got a bad relationship with food, either way can be so damn triggering. And if you grew up in a Greek Orthodox family like mine, they have no shame in telling you to your face, you're fat, you shouldn't be eating. Like actual words, like not like that, actual words that, like exactly that, where it will be something like, it'll be either one or the other. It'll be like, oh, you're too skinny. You know, you need to get fat so you can have kids. That is true. You need to get fat so you can have kids. And out of their same mouth to my cousin, who is, let's say, 10 pounds heavier than me, they'll be like, you're so fat, you'll never find a husband.
Oh my goodness.
And it's the women that are saying this.
Yeah.
And someone like me who's grown up with a bad relationship with food, you better believe that shit's triggering.
Oh, of course it is. Not to mention that's like pretty rude. I'll be honest.
Very rude.
So again, you know, it can be very, very difficult to break habitual behaviors like this. It'd be hard for me to go home and have dinner with my family and say like, I would really like to not be a part of conversations that involve like how many calories are in this or how your thighs are looking or pinching, you know, areas of fat. Like I would like to not be a part of that. I may have to remind them of it a number of times. Ultimately, though, my boundary is I will not be a part of those conversations or I will not be receiving these conversations. So again, you can't control what they choose to talk about. You can say, when you say stuff like this, it's really harmful and damaging, or we're trying to teach the kids, like we're not trying to invest the kids in diet culture. We're really trying to teach them a different way. And when you speak like that, it really reinforces these very harmful ideologies around food, and they're very impressionable. So, you know, we'd like to not talk about that at the table. You can remind them in the moment, but what it may end up being is, oh, this isn't a conversation that I'd like to be a part of, and you leave the table. Or you go sit at a different table, or you go talk to somebody else. Or maybe, ultimately, if they really are struggling or refusing to respect that boundary, maybe it's, I don't see my family over food. I come after the meal is done, because you know that the food environment is going to be really triggering. Ultimately, it's up to you to hold that boundary, but you may have to be pretty persistent with patterns like that.
I really appreciate that you said that, because that's one thing that I don't think, I never thought through. It's like, well, I can't not go to my dad's to eat. I can't not go to my cousin's to eat. It's like, oh yeah, you can. You absolutely can.
You absolutely
You don't
can.
want to.
Yeah.
You may rather be uncomfortable, let someone overstep your boundary time and time again than saying no. Cool, that is your prerogative.
Yeah.
But no, you have the choice.
Yes. And I will also remind you that your family has the choice. So they may see you choosing to leave the table as like a punishment. But here's the thing. I have said to you, this conversation is really bad for my mental health. It's very triggering. It's really problematic. It could bring me back into eating disorder behavior. Like, for whatever reason, I need this one little thing to not be a subject of conversation. If they continue to choose to overstep that limit, that's their choice. And you are simply responding to their choice. Your response is a consequence to their action. And sometimes I'm like, man, if you can't do the bare minimum required to keep me safe and healthy, how much do you actually value this relationship, right? It's not that hard to just like not comment on my plate.
And relationships also are another one that I think probably one of the hardest, because especially if you're in a position where you really want a relationship, but let's say you don't want to settle, right? You know your worth. You're like, I'm not going to settle for someone less than. I know what type of relationship I want to be in. And then you go to your family gatherings and everyone's basically single shaming you.
Yeah.
Like, this is something I'm hearing a lot now from a lot of my single friends, where it's like they get single shamed all the freaking time.
Yeah. My relationship status is not up for discussion. That's it. That's as simple as you need to make it. Right? Or, oh, I'm not talking about that today. Or, when I have something to share, I'll let you know. So, Aunt Rose, how was your vacation? Whatever that looks like, you can absolutely set the boundary that that is not a conversation that you're willing to be a part of. And if they persist, your yellow or red boundary is this, like, you are being deliberately rude. I have asked you not to discuss my relationship status. It's not something I care to talk about. Please change the subject. And if they won't, you leave the room. But it can be really, really hard. I mean, it feels like they're trying to impose their values upon you, and it can be hard not to internalize that. If they're saying, why haven't you found someone nice? Why haven't you settled down? It can be hard not to internalize, like, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. There isn't somebody out there who sees me for who I am. And even if they think they're being helpful by boosting you up, the way you choose to interpret that can be really damaging. Sometimes having a conversation outside of that moment ahead of time, like, hey, when you talk to me about why are you still single, I'm working through this with my therapist, but here's what I hear when you say it. And I know you don't mean it like that, and that's not like your responsibility, but that's why I'm saying let's not talk about it right now. Because there's some stuff that I'm working through, and it would just be so much easier if that subject were off the table.
Oh, I love that. Like, really saying, like, look, it's not your responsibility, but I'm still working on it. It's actually the conversation I have with my husband about my triggers. Because I'm like, hey, you're triggering me right now. It is my trigger. It is not your trigger. But I need your help right now. So please don't say X, Y, and Z. And then as I get more comfortable, as I get better at growing and making sure that this actually now no longer triggers me anymore, then you can start to use that language. But right now, it's actually detrimental.
Yes.
And so having that, like, really transparent conversation, and you said it earlier, when allows you to see how people are going to respond.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful as well.
I think that it is. I say often, other people don't need to understand or agree with your boundary in order to respect it. If I showed up here today and I said, wow, Lisa, you look amazing, pink is your color, and you said, I'm really struggling with compliments about my physical appearance right now, I would really rather you not. I would say, okay, cool. Lisa, your last interview was fantastic, right? It's such an easy flex. I don't need to understand why you're having a hard time with comments about your appearance or the color pink, but I love you and I care about you and I'm just gonna flex. It's not that hard. what does happen sometimes is that people take it defensively. They see it as an attack on them. And again, that is not your issue or your responsibility, but you do have to learn how to navigate that, how to navigate sort of that kind of pushback or defensiveness.
Yeah. I love how honest you are in the book. It is so beautiful. And there's one thing that you say, especially when it comes to families. And as I read it, I was like, oh my God, everyone at home will know exactly what you mean. Where you say, look, there's also side effects to setting boundaries with family. Yeah. And you say the side effects are you get labeled difficult. Your family can gang up on you, or they just exclude you. Yeah. And I was like, homie, these are 3 very powerful things that I think really do influence whether we put boundaries with our family or with our mums or not, because we don't want to be excluded. That makes us feel bad, right? And we don't want to be ganged up on. Now you feel like you have to go in defensive mode, and you definitely don't want to be labeled difficult if to you, you're doing it for your own sanity. Yeah.
I mean, some of these are a little more navigable than others, right? I'm pretty sure some members of my family think I'm the difficult one or like the demanding one. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with that because I am seeing the effects of boundary setting trickle down to like my younger cousins now. I'm watching them kind of stand up for themselves more and say no and talk about their feelings more. So like I'm comfortable being that change agent. The exclusion, the ganging up on you, that can feel a lot more difficult. It really can. And here's the thing. This is a really critical moment for you and your boundaries, because if you set a boundary that you know is healthy and reasonable and would improve the relationship, and you get so much pushback, whether it's in the form of gaslighting or peer pressure or exclusion or the silent treatment or whatever manipulative tactic, you have 2 choices. You either hold that boundary for the sake of your own good and your own mental health, which is really affirming and affirms your worth and your value and that you can be trusted and honestly keeps you safe, or you go back on that boundary and then you've taught them that if they push hard enough, you'll give in. And I can't tell you what to do in the moment. I know standing firm feels really uncomfortable, but giving in is uncomfortable too. Because then you have resentment and anxiety and dread and anger. That's equally uncomfortable. And like only one of those paths leads to actual change and improved health.
Oh my God, I got a quote of yours that really hit me, that just made me think of it. Folks may apply all of the tactics, defensiveness, hostility, blaming, manipulation, because if they make you feel bad enough, maybe you'll drop this inconvenience, for them, boundary altogether, and then life can resume as it was.
That's it. Yes. When you set a boundary, it often means you are revoking a privilege that the other person was never meant to have. And it can feel like to that other person that you're taking something away, right? When your mother-in-law just shows up at your door yet again without calling, even though you've asked her a number of times, and you open the door and let her in, even though it's not convenient for any of you, that is a privilege that you have been allowing her that she does not deserve. So when you say you need to call before you come over, and if it's not a good time, I'm going to tell you, and she shows up on your door and it's not a good time and you don't answer the door, or you open the door and say, sorry, this isn't a good time, come back later, she's going to be pissed. But that's her rude behavior. She may make you try to feel bad for setting the boundary and being the difficult one, but that is just a manipulative tactic to take away from the spotlight that is her poor behavior. You asked her to call. That is a perfectly reasonable request. She refused to do that, even though she could have. And now she's trying to make you look like the bad guy. You don't have to pick that up.
Oh, God. Okay, well, in-laws, especially mother-in-law, is even harder because it's not even a direct relationship you've started through them, right? Yeah. It's like you found your partner and you're related to them, or your friendship in your family is like the byproduct, right? Yeah. She's because she comes along with the partner. So in those situations, it can become very tricky when your partner maybe sides with their parent.
That's a tough one. I have an in-law rule, which essentially says, deal with your own parents. If I'm trying to set a boundary with my parents for the good of my relationship with my husband, I am setting the boundary with them, and I'm doing it like this. Brandon and I would like you to call before you come visit. It's really important to us that when you visit, it's like an okay time for us, that my son isn't busy doing homework or that we're not invested. We would like you. It is not, Brandon doesn't like it when you drop by without calling, so could you call first? Like, that is a recipe for relationship disaster. You have a lot of relationships on the line when you try to set a boundary with in-laws. Yours with your in-laws, yours with your partners with their parents. And maybe even the kids are involved in it. So the very first step is getting on the same page with your romantic partner about the boundary that you need to set together as a couple. And that can be really challenging.
What if you disagree with your partner?
There's always a compromise. There's always a compromise. First of all, your partner may just be unwilling because they have witnessed their parents running people over for their entire lives, and they don't want to be the one that gets run over. So they just might be really nervous about that. But maybe if you explain, look, I've got you as backup. We're going to handle this as a team together. Here's how it's going to benefit our relationship, me and you. Here's how it's going to benefit the relationship with your parents. Maybe they'll get on board. If not, is there a compromise? So, okay, you want your mom to be able to come by whenever she wants. That's cool. If I'm busy, I will not feel obligated to entertain her. So if she stops by without calling, she's yours. And that might be a compromise that works for you. So again, the key is like expectation setting, having clear, kind communication, getting on the same page, and then firmly sharing and holding that boundary together as a couple.
Oh, that was so powerful, gal.
Yeah.
You share a story about your Uncle Joe in the book where you were very aware not to shame him. And I think that this is a beautiful story because I think when we, as you're talking, right, especially if you're insecure and you're just starting to set boundaries, you try and put, like, at least for me, I try to put my whole effort and energy into it, right? Which means, like, I just have to, like, say it strong and be firm. But in that, depending on how you say it, depending on the language you say, it depends on what you say, the boundary, the way you set the boundary can actually now shame the other person.
Yeah.
Or they start to feel the shame. So tell, if you don't mind, sharing the story about your Uncle Joe and just the very simple, easy way of how you set the boundary.
Yeah, I think it's such an easy example to understand when I talk about how a boundary isn't about controlling someone else's behavior. So if Uncle Joe comes into my house and pulls out a cigarette and goes to light it, my boundary is not, you shouldn't smoke. My boundary is, I don't allow smoking in my home because it smells bad and my son is mildly allergic and I don't want the smell in my carpets, whatever that reason, right? So my boundary is I don't allow smoking in the home. So I'm going to make a request of Uncle Joe, either put it out or go outside. If Uncle Joe comes in a second time and goes to light up, he gets a reminder, and maybe he just doesn't get invited over to the house anymore if that's his kind of persistent behavior. But I'm not telling Uncle Joe he can't smoke. That would be controlling. I'm not saying he shouldn't smoke in anyone else's house because that's not my boundary domain. I am saying for my own health and safety, I don't allow smoking in my home. Now, does it require Uncle Joe's cooperation? Yes, right? If he lights up anyway, that's really problematic and incredibly rude. And what might I do then? I'm going to have to ask him to leave. I might grab the cigarette and put it out myself, whatever that looks like. But that's obviously incredibly damaging to the relationship. So sometimes you do need the other person to cooperate to help you meet your healthy limits. But it always comes back to the self, because in that instance, at some point, Uncle Joe's going to come home and he is never going to be allowed in my home again because he has chosen to overstep that limit. So, severely.
Click here right now to learn the sneaky manipulation tactics that you need to watch out for.
Other people don't need to understand or agree with your boundary in order to respect it. She may make you try to feel bad for setting the boundary and being the difficult one, but that is just a manipulative tactic.